r/AskReddit by Reddit and chill. Late night security guards or people who work the graveyard shift. What's the scariest paranormal thing you've experienced? I don't work the graveyard shift. I'm a teacher, but I frequently stayed late during the winter months to try and catch up on work. Sometimes I don't leave until 7 o'clock-ish and by then it's pitch dark outside. Many times while thus alone I have heard children giggling. I've gone through the building, room by room, looking for the source since the idea of little kids locked in overnight is not pleasant. Never can find anyone. The doors and windows are locked and no sign of anyone outside. Asked around and it seems lots of fellow staff who have stayed later than normal have heard the laughter, as well as other sounds. Now when I hear the giggles I use my teacher voice and tell them to keep it down. Seems to work, so I'm fine with that. Teacher voice on ghosts. As a fellow teacher, I cannot tell you how much I love this. It's my one and only superpower. I'm a truck driver that works a midnight to noon shift. A few months back I was driving through the mountains in California at around 300 headed for Reno. Up ahead next to the road I noticed what I could only describe as an abomination. It stood on two legs and looked like a monster out of a nightmare. My blood turned cold and I felt fear overcome me as I approached it as it just stood there next to the road looking at me. After the longest 3 seconds of my life I realized it was a deer that was facing away from me with its body turned around so it could lick its own behind. Top ucking keck. I don't know why, but those big animals always seem to be butt first when I'm hauling butt myself. Moose and buffalo don't have reflectors out back. I occasionally work the overnight shift as a security guard at a distribution warehouse. We're in a little shack out in the yard, checking trailers in and out. On more than one occasion I have caught the reflection of different people in the windows and glass doors of our shack. When I turn to look, there's no one there. Every inch of this area is under surveillance. No one ever shows up on video when I review the footage. I just ignore it these days. Fellow overnight security guard here. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. I'm starting to regret clicking this thread. Counselor at a psychiatric hospital. I work a ton of night shift, and some spooky things tend to happen. You'll hear a door creaking open, and one of the patients leans out, exposing half his face. He's staring at me and whispering something I couldn't hear from that distance. Naturally I ask him if he is doing okay and if he needs something. He doesn't respond, but very slowly leans back into his room and closes the door. This repeated itself a few times during that night. It's a story I like to tell to people who ask me what I do for a living, because in hindsight I find it quite amusing. At the moment though, it freaked me the hell out. Man, that's insanely creepy. I couldn't imagine how unnerving that'd be if you weren't expecting it. Insanely creepy. I see what you did there. I worked day shift security at a museum historical village in Michigan. The houses had been moved across the country from various places and put all in one place. Many of them were hundreds of years old. There were houses where you would walk into and hear footsteps walking around upstairs. This is when we were closed and the buildings were locked up. Also there were houses that I would walk into and feel like I am not welcome here and need to leave immediately. On the flip side there were houses that I could walk into and having a crappy day and I would always be in a better mood when I left. I would talk to the night shift guards and they would tell you about the lights and voices they would experience in the museum at night. We have the chair that Lincoln was sitting in when he was shot and the car that Kennedy was riding in when he was shot. They swore up and down that you would hear and see things around both of them at night. Whoa. Never knew that there's such a cool museum style village. Also, just wanted to say I really love the part about houses that makes you feel better. www.thehenryford.org. It really is a cool place. If you're ever in Michigan I highly recommend checking it out. Edit the house that always put me at ease was once owned by Noah Webster. I don't know what it was about that house but I always felt better whenever I had to check it when we were closed during the winter. The one that I hated and didn't like stepping foot into was a plantation house that I believe dated back to the 1600s. I posted this before in another thread. I supervise the cashier area in a casino and I've always worked grave. Back then we used to close the floor at 4 AM. I was working one night with Amber in distant and she had to run home for a bit about 5 AM. I was just finishing up paperwork so I didn't mind. I was standing up and my hair was kind of in my face. I was concentrating on my paperwork when for a split second I thought my hair had moved, but I realized that it was one of the cashier's swivel chairs slowly spinning. I stared at it until it stopped, kind of frozen with confusion as to how it happened. So I was feeling kind of creeped out, so I sat down, figuring I'll just wait until my behind assistant got back. Then surveillance called and were like, "Did you see that?" We kind of laughed about it like WTF was that. I wish that video got saved, but I don't know if they ever did save it because this was well over 10 years ago when they were still using tape that was wiped every 2 weeks. Definitely a WTF moment. Native casino? Those seem to be extra creepy for your displeasure. I've posted this before as well. I used to supervise the buffet in a casino on the closing shift, which meant most staff except for me was gone by 10 or 11 PM depending on when we closed. But then it was just me doing paperwork until midnight or a little after. Most nights it was quiet except for whatever tunes I had on my phone or computer, which were usually turned down enough in case security decided to pay a visit. Some nights, though, I'd hear heavy footsteps going through the dining room by my office, and every time I'd go out to investigate there would never be anything there. Creepy as shit. One time, when I heard those steps though, I damn near throat punched the very much alive security guard as he came through my door. We had a good laugh about that. I regret to inform you, but your shit is haunted. If you and security saw it, there's no way it's just a WTF moment. Years ago I worked as a orderly in a small hospital on the night shift. Most of the work was just answering call lights and cleaning up messes. We had one room whose call light would go off seemingly on its own. Patients in the room would deny pushing it or it would go off when the room was empty. The story the older nurses told was of an elderly lady who spent a lot of time in that room before she passed, and it's her asking for help. We all laughed about it and it was a long time running joke, and whenever anything peculiar happened in that room it was just attributed to Vicky look for attention. 35 years have passed since that time, and after a career I find myself working in the same hospital as a retirement job. Vicky's room has since been converted into a surgical area. Bright and shiny and new, but whenever I pass that area and all of the lights are off, I swear, out of the corner of my eye I can see someone standing in the PACU. I know it's an optical illusion, but it still gives me shivers. I recently told this story to a friend who has worked here all this time, and now whenever I see her she swats me for telling her the story because she has started seeing Vicky out of the corner of her eye too. I used to work as a CNA in a nursing home overnight that had a room whose call light would go off almost nightly. The room had been converted into a supply room because of the disturbance. The 2 rooms next to it had been converted to an office and a physical therapy room because every resident that stayed in those 3 rooms would be woken up by someone screaming, and the call light in the back room would go off at least once a shift. The memory care unit was on the other side of that room, and some nights you could hear screaming coming from that room. I heard rumors about that room, but never did find out what had happened in it. That was a really creepy facility. Why am I reading the sucking thread? I used to work the 7 PM to 7 AM shift as a nursing behind assistant. About 15 years ago, I worked the surgical floor, so most patients were pre-post-op, but they would send up overflow from time to time. So we did have a death on occasion. Hospitals are generally well staffed at night, so I didn't spend a ton of time alone, but as an behind assistant, things like bathing people and changing beds was part of my job. One night I was giving a patient a bath. He was elderly and barely there in all senses. When I heard knocking, I checked the door and no one was around, so I shrugged it off and went back to work. Again knocking, but it didn't sound like the door. The 3rd time I realized it was coming from the window. At first this confused me, so I just opened up the blinds thinking maybe some kids were running around playing a joke. There were apartments nearby and kids are weird. When I opened the blinds I suddenly remembered we were on the 2nd floor overlooking the parking lot. This sent a chill down my spine, and I waited to see if there was any movement or reasonable explanation. When nothing presented itself, I just freaked out internally and shut the blinds. I tried rushing through the rest of the bed bath, hoping it was over, when the knocking happened again. I didn't go look. I finished up, grabbed my stuff and got out of there. He ended up passing away a few hours later. I told a few co-workers, and they didn't seem surprised, just kinda said that weird stuff happened like that, and you get used to it. I'm impressed you check the window. I had an experience as a teen with something knocking on a second floor window that was about a foot away from me, and my response was to stay very still and very quiet long after it stopped. You know, it didn't seem that weird at the time. I was more curious than scared at first anyways. I expected to see some giggling teens run away. If anything, I was about 19 myself, so that may have something to do with it, but there was no way I was gonna look a second time, lol. When I was younger I used to work as a security guard at the Musée du Louvre, where the Mona Lisa is. I worked the day shift. It was my part-time student job, and I heard some spooky stories from the night shift crew. There was this corridor with sword on both sides and this security guy was walking by with his torchlight and suddenly something pulled his jacket that made him almost fall. He turned around and nothing was there. He was screaming on his walkie-talkie and someone had to go up and bring him to the main room. They checked the cameras and saw that his jacket just got pulled midair. The next day when they reported to the chief of security he told them to disregard this, and since that day they always do their rounds by 2 security guards. And there are many more stories from that place. We should not forget that many people died in the Musée du Louvre of violent death. Please, more stories. And why would people die violently in a museum? No, this painting is too interesting. Dies. I work at a 24-hour gas station in a small town. One night a seemingly drunk woman came in to use the washroom. As I went to unlock the door for her she said it was cold out and touched the back of my neck and it felt like ice. This seemed odd because it wasn't that cold out, but I kept walking and got to the bathroom and when I unlocked it and turned around she was gone. The next morning when the manager was in I checked the cameras and they all went down for about 5 minutes when she was there. The cameras have never been down before unless there's a power outage. Why would she touch the back of your neck? Any normal person would have flinched or turned around like what the heck. Lady. Why would she touch the back of your neck? You don't hear me questioning your eating habits, do you? So please. Stocking at Kmart. Lights were motion sensors. Randomly lights on the empty side of the store would go on. There were only 3 of us so it's not like someone was there. Probably mice. Maybe giant mutant mice. Night shift nurse. Got a patient later at night. Got them settled and had a chat. Since it is a small town, the topic of people we both mutually knew came up, including one who recently passed away. Right as we are talking about the deceased, the shower in the unoccupied bathroom turned on. I of course went to investigate and found that the washcloth the patient had used earlier was hung to dry on the faucet and gravity worked its magic and the shower turned on at a creepy time. Oh gosh, it's always nice when weird shit has a perfectly logical reason for happening. My brother and I were in the garage one night talking about ghosts when he started taunting them. I believe the house is haunted, and as soon as he finished his taunt the air compressor we used to inflate our tires turned on and I know TF out of there. Oh, I got one. I was working late at night at Colonial Williamsburg. It was my job to turn off the lights at the governor's mansion and a few other places at the end of the night. I got done and was walking to my car and my boss called me and said that I had missed a light. I was pretty new so I just said yes sir and headed back. Sure enough, a light way up in the attic was visibly on from outside. So I went to the top floor and climbed up there on the little ladder. Once up there were no lights on. I didn't think too much of it at this point so I went all the way down and back outside. Once outside again I started back to my car. My boss shot me a text and asked if I was going to take care of it or not. I told him I did and he was upset because he thought I was lying. I headed back to the mansion and sure enough the light was on. I headed all the way back up there and the light was off again. I was literally staring out the window that was lit from the outside. At this point I figured someone was screwing with me so I headed back out in a huff. I got downstairs and my boss met me at the door upset. Are you going to turn that dang light out or what? It was out. Are you screwing with me? So we both head up there and the light was off. But there was the distinct odor of a candle and what appears to be the haze of smoke around the window. I need to go find a picture on my parents' PC. I took a night photo of that exact house in October once. There is a blur that looks like a woman on the steps. This was late at night after we got done hanging at the college. Even though some paranormal stuff happens, Colonial Williamsburg is absolutely gorgeous at night, and I used to love riding my bike through there at night. Not me, but I worked with a family who cleaned offices overnight. During the summer they would bring their kids along, and their oldest kept pointing at something in the corner and asking why that man kept staring at him. They also experienced doors shutting and lights turning off. It may not have been paranormal, but it definitely freaked them out. UHH, that's definitely paranormal, lol. The floors are a bit creaky, lights tend to flicker, something keeps trying to grab my ankles from the air vents, and Bigfoot won't stop standing at the foot of my bed, but not sure if they's paranormal or anything. Night nurse. Door open. Cold air, no fan. TV's on. Finding a dead body in the bathroom floor. Yay, last night. Holy shit. Please elaborate. I can't understand your accent. I can't understand your obsession with Gunsmart. I work in a building that's built on old state mental hospital property. We're next to a field. The entire building has cameras, so I'm able to see almost everything. Nothing too big. Lights flicker occasionally. See shapes in the corner of your vision. Hear footsteps, but no one on camera. But my co-worker had a good one. She brought her 6-month-old dog into work and went on a walk with him in the field. She was probably just 50 feet from the building when her dog starts growling at nothing. About 10 seconds later, dog just books it to the building, leaving a trail of crap behind him. Co-worker runs after him and the dog is shivering. For a good while after the incident, dog would steer clear of men. He was just fine before this, but afterwards every time a man got near, he would drop his ears and tail and hide. Damn, I hate that. I live in a 1920s house and my pug will sometimes stop whatever it is he is doing and just stare across the room at nothing. Sometimes his gaze will track the nothing across the room. A couple of times he has growled or barked at nothing. Nope. The ancient Greeks Romans blamed Melano, the goddess of ghosts, and her trail of dead that she walked with at night for this. So basically, ancient pets had the same issues. Worked overnight at a large corporate office, and one night while doing rounds, checking doors, stairways, boiler rooms, there is a long hallway, maybe 400 feet, with offices on both sides and a large window at the end. I'm walking down looking into the offices, and in the window on the door I see what looks to be someone standing behind me. I brush as my reflection and continue on. While walking down the hallway I look at my reflection in the large window and continue to see something that looks like I have a second head. I start to do my rounds a little faster, getting more creeped out. Then my partner in the camera room talks over the radio asking me if an office employee is walking with me. I noped out of there and asked for a transfer the next day. Hey, who's that walking behind you is probably the worst thing to hear over the radio. Second worst is there was cake in the break room. I was the third shift receptionist to a dorm that shared space with a 50s themed diner. Though the restaurant was empty, the jukebox would occasionally play the Scorpions' Rock You like a hurricane at full volume. Wasn't every night, but almost always around 3 AM. Better than What New Cat. What if it's What New Cat played 10 times back to back but interrupted by a single playing of It's Not Unusual? I used to work overnights at a halfway house. One time me and a co-worker were chatting and see on camera a guy walking down an alley behind our place. The alley was our building, and a brick building on the other side with no doors. We thought one of our residents were running away, pretty common. So I told my co-worker to keep watching the cameras and I'll see who it is. The cameras were on the same fixture, one looking north, one looking south. The only blind spot was right underneath of them, and about a 20-foot kind of like this, equals being cameras, V being blind spot, equals V equals. I walk out to see who it is, and there's no one in the alley. I radio back to my coworker, and she says he disappeared off one camera and never appeared on the other one. So has to be in the blind spot. He wasn't. There are no doors in that blind spot or dumpsters, drains, anything. He literally just vanished. The only doors on their building were about 40 yards in each direction, both on camera. He literally just vanished. It was Tom Cruise. He put a picture on the camera so it'd be looking like there was nobody there. I used to work in a funeral home. One time, the secretary calls me and asked me to come up front because there is a strange noise coming from the ceiling. I get there and after about a minute a really loud boom 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 comes from the ceiling. We both almost knocked each other over running out of that funeral home. Turns out there was a raccoon in the ceiling, but for about 30 minutes we were convinced that place was haunted. Raccoons are crazy loud. Recently, my husband and I were awoken in the middle of the night by what sounded like a person running across our roof. Turns out it was a raccoon, but for a few minutes there I was terrified. It was about 2 AM, and a church door was unlocked on one of our patrol accounts. We had to search and clear the whole church in the dark. They had a basement and we walked down about 25 steps and it was a huge white room with a little stage and podium and about 50 wooden chairs. Moving my gun light from one side of the room to the other was the worst feelings I ever felt. I just kept hoping, please don't let anyone be sitting in a chair. Don't worry, no one was sitting in the chairs. They were moving right outside the edge of the light. I didn't need to sleep tonight anyway. Okay, this isn't paranormal in any sense of the word, but I just gotta get it off my chest. After graduating from music school, I took a graveyard shift type security job so I could practice my violin while being paid for it. It seemed perfect for me at the time. Practice for a bit less than an hour, and then walk around to see that all's well. Then, one night, there was a blizzard, and basically the city just shut down. I heard a knock at the front windows, which were floor to ceiling height, and there was a homeless man begging to come in out of the cold. To my shame, I turned my back to him and didn't let him in because I was afraid of losing my job. I wish I could say I was a minor hero that day, but I wasn't. I was craven, and I regret that incident to this day. Ducking, like and subscribe.